Hey there, Bethany Bravery. Welcome back to another episode of the Bringing Her Hope podcast. I am really excited for this one, you guys. I've been listening to Linda and Bob Lotich on their podcast, reading their book, and I'm so excited for them to share their stories. So thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, we're excited to be
we're really
here.
pumped. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. So today we're going to be talking about this concept of financial freedom with eternal impact. This is a topic we've never covered on the Bring Her Hope podcast, but there is such redemption in your guys' story. So why don't you take us a little bit on the journey of where God's taking you from and where you are now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, you start.
Sure. Okay. So for me, it started pushing 20 years ago now.
Mhm.
I was kind of living in a Florida town on a sabbatical, and I found myself basically with my car breaking down in the middle of the road, which, that happens. That shouldn't be that big of a deal. But for me, that was kind of like a life-altering turning point for me, because so much was attached to this, because my rent was due that day and I just picked up my paycheck that I had to get to the bank to cash to be able to pay my rent. And if I was late, it was going to be a $50 late charge, and I didn't have enough to cover that $50 late charge. And my friends were coming down to celebrate my 21st birthday the next day, so I had to pick them up from the airport. Like, all these things are going on. and I'm sitting there like with this in this broken down car in the middle of the road as everybody's driving by staring at me. And having this moment where I'm like, I have no idea how this is ever going to work out, how I'm going to get this car towed somewhere, fixed, and then get to the bank and then get back to pay my landlord in the next 3 hours. And that was kind of my moment where I realized that I'm not doing well financially. Because I would have told you the day before, like, I got this money thing figured out, but it was like, I was just a mess.
And you had been working in a bank and I
had all this pride thinking like, I'm fine. Like, I got the money thing figured out. And I kind of got to this point where it's like, I cried out to God. I'm like, I have no idea. I'm lost. Like, I need help. If you have a better plan, like, I need some help with it. Yeah. And, and so that was me down in Florida. And then meanwhile, like, you had your own thing.
Right. I mean, I was living in my parents' home and really had about two bills. Like, I think I had a car payment and cell phone bill or something like that, and I somehow found myself in the position where I had debt collectors calling not only my cell phone, but my parents' house phone, which was like mortifying, I just wanted to crawl under a rock. And, there was absolutely no reason for me to be there. Like, I had a full-time job. I mean, I wasn't making a ton of money, but I was living in my parents' house again, so it was like, there wasn't really any reason for me to get there. But I found myself in this position, super embarrassed. And I didn't know how to get out. I had no education. Like, most of my education was debt is bad and spending money is fun. And hopefully one day you'll be rich. And it was like, that's all I had to go off of. So the cry of my heart, and I remember praying this over and over again, I would say, God, I pray I would marry someone who's good at math. Please let me marry someone who's good at math, because I am the type of person who will add up a number, like numbers 3 times on a calculator and get 3 different numbers. I mean, it's like, it doesn't make sense how bad I am, So that, Bob Knight in Shining Armor came along and I was like, oh, great. Here, just take the mess. And now I don't have to worry about it. But
well, yeah. And when we first got married, at that point, I was a step and a half down the road from her. Like, I was a mess, but just like,
I feel like you knew where to go. Like, you were like, I have a plan of where I want to go. And you were taking action steps to get there. Whereas I was kind of like, can you just do this for me?
So anyway, that's our beginning. That's where we started.
Yeah.
Wow. So talk to me, first of all, there's one thing in both getting lost in your own finances individually, but then there's another thing of merging into a marriage and doing finances together. And I hear you, Linda, it's like, hey, thanks, Jesus, for answering the question or the request of, I get this man that's going to do it all. But does it really work like that? And what did it look like in communication? Were there arguments? What did finances look like for y'all?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot. And I think we've gone through several different phases of this, where at the beginning for me, I was like, just take it. I don't want to have to ever think about this again. And so that worked okay. And he was kind of like, all right. Like, he was a little bit excited to like, that I was just going to hop on board with whatever he said. But then as time went on, I started going, well, hang on a second. I want to do this and I want to do this. And he's like, okay. he started just like gently and slowly bringing me in as I was open to it, which was really great because he could have just said, well, you haven't had anything to do with it up until this point, like mind your own business. But instead, what was really wonderful about him is that he said, okay, if you want money for that, let's look in the budget, see if you can figure out where to take it from. And then it puts some responsibility on me, you know? And so all of a sudden, this stuff that I just wanted, that would have been so easy for me to just go throw on a credit card.
Yeah.
I had to make a decision of how we were going to pay for this. And it was really helpful for me because that started just pulling me in. And I remember we did take a financial class, and all of a sudden it was like the light bulb went on where I was like, why haven't we done this? And why haven't we done this? And Bob's like, well, I'm trying to get us there. Like,
Yeah.
and I was like, let's do it together, which was a really exciting moment because up until that point, up until that point, I was kind of like, can you figure it out and tell me what to do? And then all of a sudden I'm on board where even though I can't necessarily figure out all the things as well as he can, I still let him do that piece of it. We are all of a sudden pushing forward this thing together, and the momentum just went so much faster as we're paying off our debt. Like I was like on board before, but now we're in it together. Does that make sense?
Unity. And it reminds me of that verse, 1 can chase 1,000, 2 can chase 10,000. There was like a multiplication effect. And anyone who's married knows this. Like when you're in unity on something, it's so much more powerful.
Yeah.
And I know it's not easy to get in unity with your spouse, but it's so important. So it's worth fighting for, you know what I mean? It's worth doing the work to try to get in unity with your spouse on the money stuff.
Yeah.
What would you guys say? And either one of you can respond to this question. Maybe one spouse is on board. They have a budget. They know there needs to be a strategy. They know there needs to be a plan, but the other person just doesn't have that buy-in yet. What would you encourage that spouse in to where they're not being pushy, but the door is at least open for the conversation?
I mean, there's a lot of different things here. I think it depends. Is this a sore subject? You know, that's something to talk about. Is this a sore subject? And how can you, I think having a conversation about how can we make this not a sore subject and something that we can actually work together on.
Yeah, and doing that like preemptively. Knowing that we normally get in a fight when we talk about money. All right, so let's talk first about how we can talk about money without getting in a fight.
Right.
And then we'll, you know.
Because I mean, that's a big thing for a lot of people is, I mean, we were just having a conversation the other day and he was like, you know, this is one of those things. We need to have the conversation about how we're going to talk about this without you freaking out. Because I was getting really worked up, you know, and that happens, I think, because we hit certain nerves in each other. But, you know, if your marriage, if you love each other in your marriage, then you will fight for the thing. You will fight to work out the thing, right? Yes. So, but the other thing is, like what he would do for me is he would go, so what are some of the things you're excited to do in life? Like this had nothing to do with financial stuff. It was what excites you in life? What would you love to do? Like, you know,
what would you love to do more of? Like,
right.
What are you dreaming about? And yeah, and I think that helped a lot.
It helped a lot because I would go, well, I would love to have this much money to spend on clothes, or it would really help me if I could have some more money to take care of my skincare, or
go out for coffee
or
every
go
Saturday,
out for coffee every Saturday. Yeah, it can be anything. Like that's the thing is like there's no limits and there's no judgment for what other people want to spend their money on. You know what I mean? It's like we like to spend our money a certain way. I'm sure you like to spend your money a certain way. Like things are important to you that aren't important to us. So, but you should be able to spend your money on the things that are important to you, right?
That's
so
good.
Finding out what those things are. And then I think then there can be okay, you want to do that. I want to help you get there. Like, what if we make a financial plan to get you in that position to where you can go to coffee every Saturday morning without thinking about it. Like it's never a conversation. You go, the money's always sitting there ready for you to spend.
And now the math suddenly becomes very sexy.
Way to make it sexy. I love it. So good.
Yeah.
So you guys just recently wrote a book. I just told them prior to even this podcast, listen to the book. You can get it on any Audible situation. You can order it on Amazon or all the places, but it's called Simple Money, Rich Life. So in my life, I'm a single mom. I work full time, and I just haven't had the bandwidth to figure it out. I haven't had the bandwidth to be able to say, what do finances look like? So the concept of it being simple is sexy to me, to be honest with
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
So I would love to hear from you guys, because I think we think finances have to be complex. I think we have to have a financial degree to be able to know how to invest and how to save and how to earn. So would you tell us how this can be simple?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the biggest thing here is that I worked in banking for about 3 years, and then I worked in a financial services firm helping people, with their investments and things, like, for about 5 years. And the thing that is mind blowing to me is that the whole financial industry is built on this premise that it's too complicated for you to figure out. So you need to go hire someone to do it for you.
Right.
And the reality is that it's not. Like, all of this stuff is really, really simple.
Yeah. And our education system is really set up for that too.
Oh yeah.
Hopefully you make enough money so that you can hire someone to figure it out for you, right?
Yeah. And it's like, and meanwhile, we're not learning about this stuff in school. And it's like, that's beginning to change a little bit, and that's good. But the problem is, we're not learning about it in school. Our parents, I talk to people all the time who are like, my dad, my mom said, we just don't talk about money in our house. It's like, well, where are you going to learn? Where are you going to learn about money?
Yeah.
Like, and what it does is, if you aren't getting that education from reliable sources on how to do this stuff, then it creates a void that is going to be filled with something. Like, you're going to create beliefs about money. You're going to create habits about money that are going to come from somewhere. And so if it's not from your parents or from school or books or something, like, you're going to start being influenced by Instagram influencers, or by the pop music that you're listening to, or by credit card companies, or any number of different things that are going to fill that void. And those are like the worst place we should be learning about money and like picking up our beliefs about money.
Right.
And so anyway, all that to say, like, one of the things that I've specialized in over the last 15 years is taking these seemingly complicated things and making them simple. And that's what we've really sought to do with this book, is boil it down to the most essential things that anyone, like, we created this book to be the one book that you need to buy about money. And then you don't need to do anything else. If you want to nerd out and read a whole bunch, you can, but we created this to be the one thing. You do a few things in this book, and then you just get on with your life, and you're set on a good financial trajectory. You don't have to think about it. You can stop worrying. Like, that was the goal with it.
And I think I'm his first, case study in this. You know what I mean? Like, honestly, because he loves the spreadsheets and I remember just the other day he was telling me like the math on something that he was figuring out in his head, and he was like, do you know what I mean? And I went, no. And he just burst out laughing because he realized like it was much more complicated than maybe it needed to be. But he, there are the nerdy people out there who can go and do all that stuff. But then there's people like me who I still have to survive, right? Like, I still have money that I have to somehow manage. And like, if I can't understand it, like, a lot of other people aren't, but like, they won't even try to figure it out, because it's just feeding into that idea of it's too complicated and you can't figure it out. So, that was, I think, one of the big things that we worked on together was, can I understand it? Can I explain it to my kid? Because then you really can understand it if you can explain it to a child, right?
Yeah.
Well, and the impact, thinking about it, how we were just talking about how our parents maybe didn't talk about money, but now we get to make this generational impact.
Yes.
We get to do it ourselves, but then also teach it. And imagine the only thing when they graduate from high school is they maybe even get a credit card for their first, student loan. Like, what if it looks different? What if it just looks different? I love that. So awesome.
Yeah. And I think the thing that's so important for anybody who's listening is like, I still just don't want to think about money. I just want to pretend whatever, just not think about it. Like, our kids are watching us, like, and they are watching what we're doing. And if we're not teaching them, like, we're just setting them up to continue this vicious cycle.
Right.
And so the best thing that we can do is begin, just putting a little bit of effort in ourselves so we can improve our financial situations.
And I would argue you're thinking about it anyway. You think you don't have it at the time, but actually what you're doing is probably more worrying about it than you are creating a plan to make it easy and simple, and so that you can actually move on and not have to think about it all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's the thing I think so many people don't think. Like, once you get your ducks in a row and you get pieces in order, like it's not
It's a
it's not
machine.
much work, you
Yeah.
know, like in a lot of what we talk about is like automating things so that you make one important decision one time and then it just happens automatically for
Yeah.
you. And yeah, there's just a lot of power to it.
Well, and I've heard many times that more from the women's side, but security and finances is huge. You know, to know that you're taken care of, to know that there's a plan, to know that there's a strategy. So maybe the husbands that aren't on board, they're like, there's a reason, like this would sow into kind of a love language in a sense for your wife to be able to provide that for her just by being on board and being on the same page. I love that. The book is broken up into 4 parts. And would you just kind of unpack what those 4 parts are? That they were so, again, simple, but just something relatable and tangible.
Yeah. So we, I don't know, many, many years ago, I found this quote by John Wesley, old preacher from a couple hundred years ago. And he said, I earn all that I can. I earn as much money as I possibly can, which sounds really funny hearing that from a preacher, especially a couple hundred years ago. But he said that, and he did that by writing and preaching. And then he said, I reduce my expenses as much as I possibly can. And I do both of those things so that I can give as much as I possibly can. And that quote just really resonated with me, and I think both of us. And we just have, it's been kind of like our guiding, you know, thing for our finances. And so we kind of built the book around that, adding a 4th part of enjoy it all, because I believe that we can earn money and enjoy it, or we can hate it in the same way with like reducing expenses and being more efficient with our spending. Like we can hate that.
Making money.
Yeah. Or we can enjoy it. And at the same time, giving, like I hated giving for such a long time, just had such a terrible relationship with giving. And now it's become one of our favorite things in life to do. And so all these different things, when it involves money, like we can enjoy them or we can hate them and be miserable. And I'd rather enjoy them and have fun with each of them. And so, and that's our goal, is to help anybody reading the book to earn more money, you know, without having to get a side hustle, but to amplify what they're already doing and working on. As well as just being more efficient and strategic with your spending, you know, and really freeing up more money to spend on the things you care about and that are important to you or your spouse. And then just falling in love with giving and the fun, the joy that it is, and understanding that God never designed it to be this guilt trip thing that honestly so many of us have seen so much of. It's really sad, but I think God designed it to be one of the most enjoyable things and really just an adventure that we get to go out on. And so that's where we lead people with the book, and go through a lot of our own personal story and things that God's done in our lives, and sharing as much practical stuff as we can along the way.
I love that. And this was a really interesting quote. I had it highlighted in the book. It says this, it says, you say that you don't actually have to try and spend less money, but you just have to pay attention to what you currently spend and you will automatically spend less. Wait a minute. It's like, that's like working smarter, not harder. So you got to elaborate on that. I'm loving this. Tell me all about it.
Yeah. So if you've ever been to a nutritionist, like I know I did this, I've been to a nutritionist 2 or 3 different times, and they say, all right, I want you to write down every single thing that you eat for a week. and I start doing that. And then I'm like,
you eat a lot healthier when you have to
you
do
don't even try. Like I wasn't even trying to avoid stuff, but just because I'm writing it down, I'm eating better. And so this comes from a law that this guy Pearson created. And the law is essentially this, that when performance is measured, performance improves. So when we're actually paying attention and measuring what we're doing, we automatically do it better without even trying. And so it's no different with our money. It's the same thing. You'll see that same effect, that if you just are paying attention to where you're spending, don't even try to spend less, but literally just pay attention. And so, you know, we encourage people who want to do the paper thing, like you can do it like a food journal and write it all on paper, every single thing you do, just for a week, just to pay attention to see what's going on. Or like I prefer the modern version a little bit more, using an app like Personal Capital or Mint, where you can plug everything in, your bank accounts and stuff like that, automatically pull in your transactions, and you can go back and look for the last 3 months, see exactly how much you spent on groceries. Because so many people have no idea. And then they go in there and like, whoa.
I mean, we had one person that did this, and they were like, well, there's no extra money. So they're like, I don't know how this is going to work. The first month they did this, they found $800.
Wow.
that they didn't know they were spending.
Well, and we hear that all the time.
And it's like 800, like what would you do that for $800? If somebody was going to pay you $800 this month to do that, would you think that was worth it?
Yeah, 20, 30 minutes to set this up with one of these apps or something. We had another couple that we were coaching who was getting ready to basically
they were getting ready to move
because they're like, we're so broke, we don't have any extra money, blah, 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 all this stuff. And I said, all right, well, how much do you guys spend on food? Because food is a big problem for a lot of people. Yeah. And they're like, well, I don't know. And I said, got nailed down. How much do you think you spend on eating out? And they're like, I don't know. I think it's probably about $200 a month. I'm like, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go do this exercise, go plug everything in here and come back and tell me. They came back.
They were spending $600 or $800?
No, they were spending $800. So it was $600
more
money they had no idea about. And it was like, you don't have to move anymore.
Right.
Like you just have to not go out to eat.
We just found you money.
I know.
It's not that difficult, but there's so many people that are just so wrong in their estimations.
And
of what they think
even if you decide, well, I want to spend $800 a month on eating out, that's information for you. Would you rather move or spend the money on that? You can make that decision. That's your call. But now you see where your money is going. Yeah. And you can make the best decision possible, you know? So, I mean, it's helpful on so many levels, I think.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to talk about earning more. And I'm really curious if you found this as a correlation for you, Bob. I know in your story that we haven't really gotten to talk too much about, you left a job and you stepped into something you feel like God was calling to you to. And we really talk about purpose a lot on this podcast, that man, God has given you giftings and talents, and operating in those is incredible. But I'm curious, did you find that when you were stepping into the purpose that he had for you, also had higher income earning potential just because of the opportunity that you were operating in your gifts?
Yep, 100%. 100%. Like, I mean, so in the book, I talk a good bit about my story and the years of struggle, the years of feeling trapped in a dead-end job, feeling, and honestly doing work that I wasn't good at, which is one of the most frustrating things, feeling like you're trapped in a job. And I've always been a hard worker. Like I've been good at working hard, but there's an Einstein quote that I love where he says, if you judge a fish by his ability to climb his tree, the fish will always go around thinking he's an idiot.
Yeah.
Like it's like, but that's not what the fish was designed to do. Like he's never going to be able to climb the tree like a squirrel. So it doesn't matter how hard he works. And so that was me for so long. I was in jobs that I wasn't gifted at, and I was working hard, but it just didn't matter. I wasn't going to progress as someone who was in that job who was naturally gifted for it. And so then stepping out of that into the thing that God, that he moved me into, that I had natural gifting for, it's like the wind's at your back and it's like you're going downhill on roller skates. It's like, it's so much more fun. And then from an income earning potential, it's like, you're never going to, like, somebody who is just clocking in and clocking out and just trying to skate through the day with just to get by. Like, they're never going to beat somebody who doesn't even care about the clock and who's just doing what they love. Like anybody who's ever really changed the world, like I guarantee you, they weren't the type of people who was just like, I got to go to work today and just dragging their knuckles to get there. Like,
well, I mean, have you ever even just been to like a doctor who they're just like, well, I see patients like you all the time. This is what we do, And then on the other side, you will see a doctor who's like, okay, tell me more. How does this affect you? And they put all these puzzle pieces together because they're actually passionate about their work, right?
They're not just checking a box.
Yeah.
Like they're really
and it makes a huge difference. And then what happens to those people? It's hard to get into them because their practice is so full because they're doing a great job at their work. Yeah. So, I mean, even in like high income, I like areas of work, it's like you can choose to be mediocre at it and just have a mediocre salary, or you can choose to go after it with all you have. And I think that's like the huge component in here is this what you're passionate about? Is this what God's created you to do? And once you hit that stride, then you just go so much further.
Yeah. And just as a side note, for anybody who's listening, I think there are exceptions to this. Right. I think there are, so for example, someone who decides I'm going to be a pastor whatever in Africa or something, like that's a different thing. And I think it's important to view that through the lens of eternal success
So
and
true.
not just whatever the dollar amount salary that we're talking about.
Yeah.
But I think in general, people who operate within their giftings have higher earning potential than those who don't.
Mhm.
Yeah. And if we're going to spend that many hours a day on our job, why not love it? Why not look just like what we did with our finances, look with intention and say, we're going to be doing this anyway. Why not
Yep.
be
Right.
passionate
Yep.
about it? I love that.
Mhm.
Hey, I want to talk about the adventure of giving. Sometimes as Christians, it's a weird topic to talk about, but you guys gave 40% of your income in a year. How did you do that? And how has giving become an adventure?
Yeah.
Well, when you were 10 years ago,
31.
Bob was praying
Mhm.
and he was actually trying to go after a financial goal and saying, Lord, we wanted to pay off our house, which, side note, that is something that is possible. And I forgot to say this earlier when we were talking about how this affects our kids. It's like, I'm excited to tell my kids, even if they never do pay off their house, but that it's possible. And
Mhm.
that's something to work towards and not just be like, well, it'll never happen anyway.
So
Be
many people
discouraged about
never
it.
like even think of that as an option.
Right.
And that's the thing. If you don't even think that it's a possibility, like
You
how are you
can't
going to
get
work
there.
towards it? How are
Yeah.
you going to believe God and pray for it? You know?
But yeah, so at this time Bob's saying, God, we want to pay off our house. And he just felt this, the Holy Spirit on the inside saying, if you want to pay off your house, I want you to start giving your age as a percentage of your income. So that was 31.
Age 31.
And
so
how did you feel first when the Holy Spirit is saying this to you? What is your first emotion? What is
my first thing I thought was, this is absolutely crazy, because I was actually praying in the middle of this big field where no one was around, and I looked up to the sky like, is this a joke? Like, I don't think I'm making this up, because it was one of those moments where it's like, I'm pretty sure this is coming from God and this isn't my idea.
Yeah.
And and then my math brain kicked in and I'm like, like trying to figure out, like, can we even do this? Are we gonna be able to buy groceries? Are we,
Right.
like, no idea. And then I went back to the house.
Well, and then you said, I'm asking you to pay off our house and you're asking me to lay that down.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Like, that was part of it too. Like the giving up on this goal and this dream that we have, because pretty much, if you ask anyone who's not a Christian, what's the best way to pay off your house, they're going to say it's definitely not giving away all your extra money.
Yeah.
Like, I promise they're going to say that is not the solution. And so it's like the worst way to do it in the natural, but it was just really clear to me that this is what God was leading. But yeah, it was a big sacrifice, because like we had been dreaming about paying off our house for so long. And that was kind of hard. Like, and it honestly almost felt like, God, like, we've been tithing for so long. Like, we've been doing all this stuff, like trying to obey you. And it feels like you're like not helping us on this thing. I just asked you for this and you're telling us to do something else. But anyway, I went and talked to you.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
And I mean, that's what's so kind about the Lord, is he's never like, do this. He's always like, hey, here's an idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what
I'd
it
love
felt
for
like.
you to do this. That would be great.
Yeah, and that's where, like, I feel like this adventure kicked in, because I didn't feel like God was like, you better do this or else I'm gonna get you. It felt like just this gentle invitation. Like, hey, do you want to come on out, step out of the boat and step on this water? Do you want to be someone who actually can say that I walked on water, like Peter?
Wow.
Like, what a cool story Peter has. He can say that how many people in the world have ever walked on water,
Right.
But Jesus invited him out to that. And I felt like God invited us out into this. And
yeah, so you came and talked to me, and up to that point, we had been through things like this before. Like, God had said, oh, you're trying to accomplish this goal. Why don't you give it instead? And so we had seen that happen enough times with smaller amounts. And every single time, God came through for us in a big way that we were not expecting.
yeah.
And so, like, it's really fun when you see God come through, that when he asks you to do something the next time, it's just a little bit easier. And even though they get bigger and bigger, the more you say yes to him, the easier they get,
Yeah.
So, I don't want to be like, oh yeah, it was easy, no problem. There was definitely the your head plays tricks on you, right? It's like your mind is playing tricks on you, trying to get you
creeps in.
to be afraid of what's going to actually happen. But we decided to go for it. And what I love is just being like, okay, Lord, we'll say yes to this, but if we can't eat groceries. Like, I don't think that's your will for us either. So,
Yeah.
you know, we're going to do this as long as you allow us to do this. Like, this is up to you now. It's your
Yeah.
idea. So you're going to have to provide
Yeah.
for this to happen. So, we said yes. And so your
Yeah.
trajectory to pay off the house was what, 3 to 4 years?
Well, at that point, after we made these adjustments, I was thinking it was probably going to be about 10 years to pay off our house. But the amazing thing is that 10 months later, not 10 years, but 10 months later, our mortgage was paid off.
I mean,
And
You hear
like,
that?
and we
Good multiplier? Come on.
no,
Hold
like we
on.
still like scratch our heads. Like, I don't know how that happened. Like, but it was just one of those loaves and fishes, God's things that he did.
yeah, his math is different than our math. You know, his ways are not our ways. And we had this, well, especially Bob had this plan, and we're pushing this thing forward together, like praying and believing God. And then he says, do this. And we're like, all right, Lord, your math is different than ours. So let's just see what happens.
Yeah.
And sure enough, he comes through, pays off our house so much faster than we had even had ever dreamed.
Yeah.
So we had that house for less than 3 years and we had it paid off. I mean, that's just like, I don't know about anyone listening, but I didn't grow up like that.
Yeah.
I did not grow up in where anyone paid off their house ever.
No,
Or
it
if they did, it was like they had lived there for 30 years, right?
It was more of like maybe a paid off car, but never the house, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so that's part of what, we're banging the drum on, is getting people to see beyond what they've known, see beyond their neighbors, because God's not limited by that.
Absolutely.
Like, God is capable of doing so much more in our financial
Mhm.
lives than so many of us give us credit. And he's like worked to like bring us out of that small-minded thinking.
Mm,
And we're on our journey, like, because I still believe there's so much more that we're not seeing beyond, like this Ephesians 3:20, exceedingly abundantly above and
Yeah.
beyond all we can ask, think, or imagine. Like,
Right.
there's something there, but God is not limited. There's no financial situation that's too tough. There's like, it doesn't matter what your society, what your world is like, God is able. And
Yeah.
I just want people to see that and get that.
Mhm.
so good. Well, and I think what's contagious from you guys, just listening to you tell the story, is you dream with the Lord. You dream
Yeah.
big dreams with him. I think sometimes our
Yeah.
lives feel so mundane when we
Mhm.
stop dreaming. And
Yes.
just the concept that you guys do that. So you dream so big to give $1 million away by age 40. How in the world? Tell me how that happens. Jeez.
So the thing about it is, really, the answer is just obeying God. Like, that's the short of it, because like this giving our age was such a big part of that, because once we increased our giving from a 10 or 11% to 31, and then over the years all the way up to 41 now, like that provides a lot of extra money to be given away.
Mhm.
And and then the other part of this I think was really important, and we talk about this in the book a little bit, but we began tracking our giving. And so instead of just
Yeah.
focusing solely on increasing our net worth and making that the only number that we're chasing, we decided, let's chase a more eternally focused number of how much we're giving.
Mhm.
And then now, like, that's how we're defining financial success, is the total amount we've given. And so because we've been tracking that since we've been married, we have this running total, and we just add on there every time we give some amount, any significant thing, we write on that list, and it just totals up, gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's fun for us because we get to hit these milestones and celebrate what God has done in our lives. And it's not for us to, boast or to feel important, but to just celebrate what God has done through people, two foolish middle-class kids who there's no way that we could have ever pulled this off in our own strength.
Yeah.
And so those two things combined, because I think so many people have given a lot more than they realize, but they're just not tracking it, and not paying attention. And so there's a real power in that.
Yeah. So in a marriage relationship, one person is on fire and ready to give, even ready to start with just tithing, but the other person isn't yet. Where do you go with that?
You want me to start?
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky conversation, because I've known some people who have dealt with that. I mean, close people to me who have dealt with those difficulties of not being in unity on that. And I think there's an honoring of your spouse that is important, because I think it's easy to just run out and say, well, I'm just going to give it anyway. I don't care what my spouse says. And then
Right.
create all this tension, all this division in your marriage, in which God's not excited about that either. And so, yeah, I would just suggest that that you go step by step, one at a time, through each one of these things with your spouse. And if you have a spouse who's comfortable giving 1% and you guys can be on board with 1%, then like, let's do that. If you have a spouse who doesn't want to give to church, but who wants to give to, support some local missionaries or something, like, do that. Like, start with unity, because I think that breeds higher levels of stuff.
So good. little guy.
We got the little guy in here now.
We got a mini.
You are
mini.
I just want to end on one question today. If you could give one simple step for someone who's listening to everything that they've listened to today about giving, about saving, about all of the things that we talked about, and of course, grabbing your book, what's that one piece of advice? What's that takeaway that you would like to give them?
Yeah. I think, what we already talked about, just this idea of paying attention. Like, so if somebody is not doing that, that is the easiest, quickest, big win that you can make right now. Just start paying attention to where your money is going, how you're spending it. That's really, really powerful. After that, I think the next thing to do is to try to find some way to stay accountable with your spending. Okay. And so, for some people, this is a budget, but it doesn't really matter how you do it. You need to have some walls to bump up against so that, when you decide, all right, I should be able to spend $500 a month on grocery, but every month I spend $1,000. It's like, all right, how do we put some walls in place to minimize that $500 extra spending? So some ways to put some accountability in. That's one of the best things that anyone can do.
So good.
Yeah. And my one piece is that we need to be inviting God into this area because he wants to be in it so much more than we understand. And I think as soon as we just even start praying and bringing our questions to the Lord, bringing our, hopes and desires and dreams and all that stuff, I think there's a massive shift that happens that is unexplainable. I think he just wants to be involved so much more than people realize.
He does. He absolutely does.
So beautiful. Well, again, grab your copy of Simple Money, Rich Life, but also we're doing a book giveaway because we love all of the listeners. You guys are so generous. So you can enter at bringingherhope.com. Linda, Bob, how can people connect with you? How can they follow you? What's the best way to reach out to you?
Well, we have our own podcast, Seed Time Money Podcast. We're on Instagram at Seed Time. We got a website with a newsletter where we send out all kinds of best tips and tricks and devotionals and all that stuff. And that's just at Seed Time as well. You can find that there.
So Seed Time is SEEDTIME.
Like a seed you plant in the ground.
Yep.
Perfect. And if you're driving or doing things, hanging out with kids and you're distracted, we've got all the links for you in the show notes. Thank you guys so much. This has just been a treat to talk about finances and how we can make an internal impact in the kingdom, really. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having us on. We appreciate it. It's an honor.
Absolutely.